here we are, or rather here I am. This is like, there is an account book that Mr. Chitragut keeps, up there. And every time you die, and generally we die 30, 40 times within one lifetime, you have to go and give an account of the kind of life that you've led. So I was quite excited about, telling myself, at last we got a chance to tell stories of your life. Yes, the story of my life. I ran away from home at the age of 9.
Sorry, there's a request from the back that you used.
You can't hear me? You can hear me. Yeah. But this is a little awkward. Makes me feel like Radha Ravi Shankar. You know that guy, no? Art of Living. So can I put this away and speak a little more loudly? I'll do that. I'll first, there are things that
stand and bring in front of you.
Yeah.
Okay, you tell me.
I'll tell you it.
Put your hand up if it's really difficult for you and let them figure it out.
There are a number of frameworks I have in mind. What are my passions which has kept me alive? And I consider the fact of being alive a miracle, because that I wake up every morning for me is a matter of surprise. In that sense, it's a miracle. But it's a miracle that is being continuously haunted by being human. So the miracle of being alive, being born and dying, which is equally haunted by the idea that your mortality, your contingency, your accidentality is how human condition is, and you can't find any consolation to get away from it. So within these framework of no consolations being around and life is a miracle, I find it's fascinating that we are able to tell our stories. So this is one of the stories. I could tell the story through jazz. I could tell the story through my infatuations, hopeless infatuations, of course. I could tell the story through having announced myself as a poet when I was 14 or 15. Again, an ordinary, not very gifted, but a poet. I could announce myself as a thinker, MA third class, no scholarships, not a single paper written, nothing academic to send home about. The parents accepted it as a given. So how do I frame these things? That's where I'm going to read a little. I'm known to not have written anything in 70 years of my life. But here I am, it's typed, it's real. At some point in life's journey, marked by self-doubts, vulnerable sense of being a Gujarati boy from Kalbadevi, and of course forever distracted, wanting to be loved and to love. We'll take up the idea of love a little more extensively at some point. And from the passionate readings of Tagore and John Cage and Gandhi and Simone Weil, I'm just throwing some names, get impressed. But I mean them. Because they are life-saving and therapeutic. And I will talk about that a little as to how it so happens that in some lives an engagement with a spoken written word can do what Mr. Freud couldn't do very well. Somewhere in one of many conversations with oneself, in those restless, sleepless, self-inquiring nights, it's not merely because I'm beginning to have prostate, an inevitable fact of being human, which makes you wake up. There are other questions that keep you awake. The restless, sleepless, and self-inquiring nights I had arrived at an idea. The idea was a kind of clarity that appeared, not in real terms, but it appeared to me to have illuminated and instinctively shown a path to good life. And I told myself, girls, I have an opening. Even though I am squeezed between the miracle of being alive and the fact of the human condition and predicament in which I'm caught up, little more self-consciously than my cousins and my neighbors, a little more. I'm not being arrogant about it, nor do I wish to be one of them, but squeezed between these two. And then to hit upon this, I consider to be an illuminating idea, which might lead to what was one of my favorite expressions as a student of philosophy from Plato, the idea of a good life. We'll reflect a little on this idea of good life. And what was that idea? The idea was that of non-resentment. I told myself, you aren't hugely gifted, but you are a human being. And before you die, you want to make a sense of the joys and sorrows that seem to keep you awake. You want to make sense of it. You want to compose a poetic. I might even be adventurous and use the word. You want to compose an aesthetic of yourself. You want to be involved in the project of making yourself. Michel Foucault makes a big thing about making of the self. But I consider the idea of Gandhi making of herself to be much more innovative, challenging, and provocative that I've come across. Making of the self. Not necessarily signing it, but making it. And I thought that the idea of non-resentment can be taken up by me as that project before I die. Where did I get this idea from? I realized that all my thoughts, all my feelings, my entire Bhava Vishwa, the emotive world that I carry within myself like everyone else, not only at the level of Jagrat Avastha, in my waking state, where we position ourselves between favorable and unfavorable, between Anukul and Pratikul, between likable and not likable, creating frames where things are accepted and not accepted, and we conduct our lives with that. What the Buddhists and Indian thinkers use the word raga dvesha filled. Either we are averse to something or we are attached to something. And that, of course, leads to very painful ways of being around for me. Some people enjoy that, that's okay. As I said, least we talk about others, more closer we might get to ourselves. And in that limited context, I'm only talking about myself. But I'm ready to improvise and take it further, but that's later. So the idea of non-resentment. What an idea. It comes against and as distinct from a German philosopher who functioned with utmost resentment, but extremely creatively and energetically and madly. Friedrich Nietzsche, a German thinker to whom I was, like many young people in my generation, were deeply impressed by and attracted to. The idea of God is dead was kind of a nice sounding to the ears of a one who didn't know how to go to the temples very effectively. Nietzsche worked with the idea of resentment very deeply, engagingly, and created a whole system of thinking, which of course led to his nervous breakdown. But before that, he left behind testament of a life which was ready to live dangerously without any consolation. And I like that idea. I mean, young people like that idea. You are temperamentally withdrawing, temperamentally. Unless you belong to Ambani's, and then You are withdrawing limited, careful ways, because there's so much to inherit. I only had inheritance of my father's melancholy. And I thought it's a good idea to confront it fully. What is it? And every day I ask myself, how is it that I'm living in a world where I'm constantly caught up in pratikul and anukul? What engages me favorably and what takes me away? And let me go ahead and take the name. Narendra Modi frightens me. He makes me uneasy. Now, why do I live my life in a manner where every day I am engaged with a world in which I'm caught up in this? I'm giving some exceptionally trivial examples, actually. At a much deeper level, there is a constant engagement with the self that is going on, which makes me very uneasy. Can't I, before I die, find a way of living which is based on the poetics of non-resentment? I got that from Tagore. I got that from Gandhi. And when I say that, I'll have to explain myself. Only last night, some very brilliant scholars almost scolded me. I mean, I get scolded all the time for being short and being a little, sloppy and, forgetting things. That's okay. Being scolded is a good way of being reminded that you are human. That's not all right. What I started thinking was the way I was told that, chodo apka Gandhi ko ab. And I said, no. This is another challenge I'm going to take up. Before I die, I'm going to make sense of Gandhi as a fellow human being. So now the second agenda. Conduct your life in such a way that it could perhaps develop poetics of non-resentment. What it suggests, I'll come to that. And conduct your life in such a way that you can make sense of a guy called Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. That's a good enough challenge. I have a friend called Gautam. He happens to be also known as Buddha. We get along well. Very well. Except he doesn't scold me. He says, I don't expect you to follow me at all. You're hopeless about it. But he's around when I'm engaging myself with the question of resentment and the question of Gandhi. We'll have a few things to say about that. So the idea of non-resentment, somewhat similar, for convenience I'll go ahead and use that word, to the idea of samatha. Both my Buddhist and Jain, well, there are very few Buddhist friends around, but Jain friends, I'm sure, are around. We'll say, samta, wo apna, we specialize in that. Sanyam dharma, the self-controlled ways of functioning. That I thought I had picked up by struggling to sit quietly and watching my breath at a couple of my Vipassana adventures. As Eliot would say, teach us to care and not to care. Teach us to sit still. And of course I failed miserably. 20, 30 days, 3 Vipassana severe, and I was crying and breaking down. And then I would hear Goenkaji, and he said, okay, I break down, it doesn't change anything. So I decided not to break down and survived. Perhaps it's there I picked up, deep within myself, my profound understanding of some of those sutras. But again, it was a very personal journey, trying to help yourself. Poetry didn't seem to do that as well as I would have hoped it to do it. So as distinct from the sheer delight often felt around the corner, believe me, this is a classic André Breton surrealist expression. The delight is waiting for you round the corner. And that's true. I have to tell you about my ease with the life in the streets, life in the chawls. And thank Lord that I was born in a chawl, so I'm very comfortable in entering into my high middle class building and go and ask for dahi or a little namak. Bolta mirchi nahi lete. I will take mirchis, and say कि जरा नीचे नहीं जाना है, आपके वहाँ से ले लेता हूँ. This ease has to do with feeling at home in the world, in a manner of speaking. Anywhere, everywhere. All I have to do is to open up in 1973 when I was somewhere lost in Arizona while hitchhiking, is to open up a directory and look up some Patels, phone them. I'm a fellow Gujarati, yaar, kuch khana vana khilao. And 9 out of 10 didn't know what to do, but one was always there. And sometimes 3 of them. And then, of course, on my way, I would pick up second-hand books. And I wouldn't be hungry because I'm fed by a fellow Patel. This is what I meant by feeling at home. That's a gift one has. But the gift wasn't adequate enough to arrive at the idea of non-resentment. So, if I describe this desire, so now that's the second move I'm making for myself. This desire for arriving at the poetics of non-resentment, so to make sense of joys and sorrows of life before you die, in a manner which would make both Gandhi and non-resentment feel comfortable with the kind of life you're leading, is a good project to have. I mean, that's what I mean by a good life. So if I describe this desire by naming it, this compulsive, obsessive desire on the part of all of us to name, and I'm going to go ahead and do that naming ceremony. I mean, they generally do it on the 6th day, the Fui comes and does it, but I'm doing it now. Along with Osip Mandelstam. Now, why do I talk of this Russian poet? I'm obsessed with it. And I'm quite impressed and deeply disturbed by the fact that a poet in 20th century could die for being a poet. Now, that sounds a little rhetorical. But according to me, it's one of the most profound truths after Socrates dying for being a philosopher. That you die for the fact that a form to be given to a sentence is as crucial as a matter of life and death. I thought that's a very touching way of announcing yourself and conducting your life. He died by the age of 38 or something. But before that, he gave an account of himself by formulating a sentence which resonates in your ears. He gives a fantastic little description about poetry. He says, anything that sounds, that leaves behind a resonance in your ears. What a lovely expression. That's poetry. You got it. We use big words, and rightfully so. All the acharyas do it so well. Dhvani, the resonance, taranga. As Eliot would say, when the violin continues to play even after it has stopped playing, the notes continue to ring in your ears. So it's called ringing in the ears. That's the Osip Mandelstam I'm referring to. And for good reasons. Because in one way or the other, most of us, speaking the language is the first sign of that betrayal, likable betrayal. We speak not in Gujarati, Hindi, Marathi, but in English. It's likable. It makes us smile, though she's a fellow Gujarati. This ringing in the ears and the idea of non-resentment, I thought if I can bring that together. So if I describe this by naming Osip Mandelstam's idea, where I suddenly came across an expression that gave me a sense of my first step towards my project. The idea that comes in his mind in 1916 when he tells a fellow poet, okay, why are you the kind of poet so much seriously engaged with Greek and Latin and the other areas of country outside where you were born? He says, because, and I love this expression, I'm fida is the right word. That's it, man. After Sridevi, this is the first. That's a way of putting it. There's so many Sridevis in one's life. And Sridevas, of course, I take back what I said. Let me say this. Homesickness for world culture. I thought this is an amazing expression. It is taking me near to what drives all my travel plans. And I should easily be appointed as the a General Secretary of All India Travellers Associations, Raj Travels and Kesari Travels and all that, but that's apart. This deep desire to be on the move, Charaivati, comes from this idea perhaps, I still have to fully explore it without wanting to arrive, the idea of homesickness for world culture. Now the expression homesickness, as most of us, if we are provoked and evoked to reflect on it, leads us to various ideas. Some of it to do with religious traditions. Homesickness, perhaps, as in the Christian, ideology of Christian worldview, homesickness is positively connected with the idea of return of the prodigal son. And we are homesick because we are deeply violated when we were born as human beings. That's the first sign of being homesick. I'm longing to go back to my father. Makes sense. Very Christian worldview. And of course the Indians, again for convenience I'm using these words, Christian and Indians, but we have a way of reflecting on this with the idea of parivraja. Sadhu to chalta hi bhala. How can you have a home? I thought I can construct a whole series of reflections on the idea of Gandhi's home. Think about it. This man had no home after his first 12 years of life. No home whatsoever. No legacy. Nothing left behind. Nothing. And he was at home. And of course he was at home deeply in the world in which he was born, unlike me, where I'm completely at one with the world in which I'm born. So I find it fascinating. The idea of homesickness for world culture. The word culture might entangle us. I don't want to get stuck there. But the idea of world doesn't entangle me. Culture sometimes does because it involves and somehow it associates with the idea of snobbery and rasikta and adhikaritva and cultivated sensibility, and all those issues come up, and sometimes I get uneasy with it because there is the whole other tradition where none of this is inherently required. And you can still be quote-unquote civilized in a manner that can be enviable with all your cultivated sensibility and Baddhalokta. You can't have that simplicity. But again, it can easily get romanticized, so I'll stop there. But I want to stay with this idea of homesickness for world culture. And I thought I'll connect it with the idea of non-resentment. Because if you find a way of life where you are at home everywhere, what a romantic and hopelessly ideal idea it is. I mean, at home everywhere, when you pay 98 rupees for £1, how can you be home in UK? How can you be at home when you are counting and calculating your everyday life, when you are traveling all over the world, unless you go to a country which has a different, where 1 rupee becomes 7 rupees. God, that's a place to go, but no. So I asked this question with utmost seriousness. What is it to feel at home? And of course I'm not at home. Within 3 days you are longing for your dal bhat. Within 7 days you are waiting to, you write 10 letters a day home. 5 years of stay in America, and I wrote probably not less than 5,000 to 6,000 letters to friends and families and everyone, every kind of letter all the time. I'm longing to hear my Gujarati language. If that is the case, then what do I mean? Except romantic idealism, where I say, I have a homesickness for world culture. I'm not a Christian. I'm not committed to the idea of transcendence, where I'm returning to my father's home, the return of the prodigal son. Even a black sheep is all right. Nor am I able to handle the idea of renouncing home, as Gautam did, but he found it difficult too. So he doesn't wake up Yashoda and Rahul when he's leaving. Because if he does that, then the home will return with great attachment. He says that in one of the Buddhist sutras, he says so well, where Gautam leaves home without waking him, Rahul, up, because if he turns and says, "Main nahi jaane dunga," how dare a father can leave a 3-month, 6-month baby? And it makes me think of a great poem by Rabindranath Tagore called "I'll Not Let You Go." Here is a 4-year-old girl waiting at the doorsteps of a 200-line poem. It begins with that the father is ready to pack up and go home, or go to work, The wife has packed up all the gold papadis and all the lovely nasta, saying कि संभालते रहना, toothpaste यहाँ रखी है, ये सामान भूल मत जाना. But she is a woman, she is defying her tears and not crying and breaking down. He's going on a long journey, he's leaving home. This girl has not taken her bath for the first time in the week. She's standing at the door, and now he says, Beta, मैं जा रहा हूँ. And then she says one sentence, a 4-year-old, I will not let you go. The rest of the poem, those 180 lines, is about how dare a 4-year-old girl defy the laws of the cosmos. Because anything that comes must go. So she defies that. But there's child's innocence, which functions, quote unquote, I like to think, without non-resentment, and therefore it is a daring of saying, I'll not let you go. But Rahul and Gautam couldn't handle that. So he didn't wake him up. This idea of living home is an amazing idea. We have cultivated it, but we must remember and remind ourselves that living home here meant entering into another Sangha. I am trying to think about, and this is the inherited sickness of contemporary times that I picked up romantically while reading my existential text of Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, Sartre and Camus. I thought, what a good idea to be a guru that like melancholic individual. What a good life, I mean. Ek udasi, cultivated udasi. Very likable idea it was when we were growing up. We would sit in a cafe, write our poems, and go home late. Ignore the fact that we were not usefully around. And if somebody scolded you, you would sit and do what you want. I'm like that. Of course, middle class families help in being that way. Being a wayward child, it was okay. There would always be money to be paid to the libraries from where you've stolen books, which must be paid for. So father would go and pay. You haven't paid your canvas money which you had bought. So the bill comes home and father pays off. A little grace in life. Now, does that entangle you? That's the question. Does that entangle you towards anukul, favorable attachment and aversion to those who didn't help? I'm driving back to that question. So the idea of homesickness, which I suggested can be taken in two ways, it can also number of other ways. And that's the one I want to explore through the poems that I've written, to the life that I've led, to the failures that I've collected. And I'm handling them well. They're dear to me. A classic Beckett statement: fail, fail again, fail better. This is in a play called Endgame, where he says this, one of the characters. But there is an inherent question here, which comes up in a poem that Mandelstam wrote. And let's see if we can stay with that. The first line of the poem is, don't tempt yourself with foreign languages. It will not be there when you are dying on your lips as your last word. So, wanting to be home everywhere in the world, homesickness for world culture, you can be like Arun Khopkar, pick up 7 languages, you can be very good at it. You salute that idea. But that's not a question of mastering a language. It's a question of being able to, with some ease, enter into the forms of life that are all around you. Now, why would one want to do that? Partly because one is so deeply uneasy with the form of life that you have inherited. Now, what does it mean to not feel at ease with what you are born into? That's the question. I mean, most of us, again, don't want to go into that who feels uneasy and who doesn't. It might be a question of pathos and a certain kind of likable illness. I talked about the likable illness of being melancholic. It's very enjoyable, let me tell you. Unless you have to take antidepressant. I mean, that's not. Don't take me lightly about this. To be able to handle And this is when I announced myself as a poet when I was a young boy. I was probably 15, 16, 17. And I would write, Why would I write? So I announced myself to be a poet, this Gujarati Baniya boy. In 1972, I did a full-blooded declaration by writing a long poem while I was studying in US. I'll read that poem to you. Where it says, "Hu mane aaje nagara kavi tarike jahir karu છું." I announced myself, declared myself to be a poet with his drum beats. We'll go into the idea of Nagara because I'm using mythology of Lord Shiva and Dundudu. He plays his Damaru. And of course I'm finding African beats in his Damaru. And of course I'm finding some likable ideas of hashish smoking Shiva. I love that. You are in 1972. What else are you doing with your life? You're smoking and getting more intoxicated, and you're looking at the cover page of all those LPs where it allows you to go into it, the psychedelic world. You thought you got it. God, it brought disaster. It brought one of the most maddening period in my life when I took my first mescaline. We'll talk about that a little, because many of my best poems has to do with having engaged myself with those years. But what I did was to announce myself as a poet. But that's 1972. But much before that, very early, I wrote a poem when I was 17. Of course, deeply, we'll get into that, deeply influenced, without fully understanding. How could a Kalba Devi Gujarati boy understand English? Yaar chodo. Gujarati bhi aadhi paadi aati thi. The poem was called Howl by Allen Ginsberg. And somehow we came across it. And I would go to Ahmedabad and read out the poem to my friends who didn't understand any English, and therefore they loved it. When I said they didn't understand any English, what I meant was that it didn't matter to them that he was saying, I saw the best minds of my generation dying in the street. I loved it. And I loved imitating in the streets of Ahmedabad with my poet friends. And I was 17. I would stand there and give Hitler's speech. Ein Sachs! Dialogue Proust! And it was always my own German. It had nothing to do with German language. But it had a lot to do with extraordinary infatuation with that Nietzschean idea of destroying yourself. And I loved that idea. Through Hitler's speech and through writing that particular poem, which became very controversial, which goes like this. હું જોઉં છું અમારી સભ્ય સંસ્કૃતિને રજાના દિવસે ચોપાટીએ બેલ ખાતા અને એકમેકના સ્તન આમળતા. એમની પીઠ પરથી ને જાન પરથી હાથ ફરતા રહે છે. હું જોઉં છું ને મારી મા રસોડામાં રોટલી બનાવી રહી છે. હું જોઉં છું અમારી સભ્ય સંસ્કૃતિને. And I realized there's nothing but the line from Allen Ginsberg. Why did I announce myself as a poet? I talked about non-resentment, and here I am, getting deeply attracted to the beat generation, to the existential aura of sitting around and writing your great philosophies in Napoli. All I did was to order some soup and acted like fellow Sindhi boys who were so good at being at Napoli while I was learning. A Gujarati boy must learn how to smoke his 555 cigarette and play tin patti and be one of them. Be other than what you are. What a challenging experiences they were. How else would I have found a way of arranging meanings and engaging with hopelessly infantile infatuations and sexually charged neuroses and energies? How else? You are 16. You have this infantile. Infantile is the right word, because by that time, within 3 years, I read up everything Freud. And then I further studied him in US. So I knew what is infantile sexuality is. And what is this charged neurotic energy that you carry within yourself. How do you handle it? Well, one of the ways I handled it was to write poems about it. Jo mane nahi apo veshya na stano, and I'm only 17 writing. Give me the breast of a prostitute, or I will make sure all the gods of this world will die. That's the poem I wrote. Strange, no? I mean, of course, my mother didn't read it. She still doesn't know what I'm doing with my life. But she's extremely happy. She's 92. She said, Prabodh, barabar karine aavja. I said, don't worry, I'll do well. When I did my first painting shows, she sent me a message in Jangir Art Gallery. She didn't come there. She said, samjhayeva chitro karje. And I printed all that in my catalogue very happily. Samjhayeva chitro karje. Good wishes from your mother, very much like Bhupen. Of course, I mean, it was so good to imitate Bhupen in everything. One day when one was 80, we had just become good friends. How else would I have found a way of managing and engaging with hopelessly infantile infatuations and sexually charged neurotic energies, forever attracted and confessing, I love you to every second human being on this earth. Of course, the neighbors came first, then the cousins, and it went on and on and on. Hopeless infatuations, resulting into more self-pity, more self-introspection, more restless and sleepless nights. Now that is gone, but the nights continue. Therefore, the seeking for non-resentment. Non-resentment with oneself. Because more than the world is some kind of not coming to terms with, no samadhan, but some way by which you speak to yourself non-resentfully. And therefore, be loving too. And it sounds little Buddhist, it sounds little Astha and Sanskar channel-like, but we can take care of that. Sorry? No, I don't think so. We'll talk to that. No. I don't think so. I mean, that's okay. I'm wearing my Levi's and I'm okay. Having said this, and having declared my project to friends and myself, of standing by the questions of formulating the aesthetics of non-resentment, and still looking for cherishing the experience of homesickness for the world, culture. And because I continue to cherish it, of course it's easy to say that, Prabodh, you are an incorrigible romantic. Not a bad idea. At one point, when Mitra wasn't keeping too well, many years ago, a very close French friend who arrived from Paris knocked at the door, came into the house, and I immediately started talking about, I'm worried. He said, you can't be worried, you are a hedonist. So I live with these two titles, being a hedonist and being an incorrigible romantic. And yet, nights, hedonists generally sleep well, I like to think. But so, the paradoxes and the contradictions of all these issues then becomes... Now I'm going to introduce two ideas here. One is the idea which comes from Tagore in his discussion with Einstein, where he makes a distinction between tathya, that is to have fact-driven humanity, meaningful, useful, appropriate for what it does. Tathyagat itihas, he calls it. One that is driven by facts. Fine. But he says there is a parallel history composing itself all the time. He uses the word bhavagat itihas. Now, to try to work out the notion of bhav as emotive is partly okay, but I think we should stay with the idea of bhav and tathya, and make sure that they interact in a manner which are fruitful. So I think at this point I told myself, okay, you have limited gift as a poet, you're not committed to it, you don't nourish it, you don't nurture it, you don't take care of it. You can't compose poetics just by being, impulsive and instinctively, giving yourself to it and never rewriting the poem you write. I mean, you don't do that. It's something to be hugely cultivated. There is a whole siksha there, a whole question of discipline and methodology, vagere, skill, to put it very crudely. But then I tell myself, there is a man called André Breton. the kind of young guru of surrealist ideology and aesthetics and pronouncements and manifestos. And those were the years when everything Dadaism and surrealism must be read and mastered, internalized, and then announced to the Gujarati world. So Sitanshu and I started a magazine when I was 17, he was 20, in which we said, at last the first surrealist manifesto in Gujarati has arrived to Nariman Point. Join us with your funness. And we would go there on Saturdays, and only he and I were there. Because first surrealists are two generally. And we started a magazine. And he wrote about surrealism, and I wrote about poems, and I wrote poems which simply said, ha 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 ha, hasiye, chalo hasiye, hasiye, hasaye ne, hasiye, hasiye. I went on to write a poem like that, and I would get Raghuveer Chaudhary, our very seasoned critic, would write, this is interesting, Prabodh is working with sound. I was working with nothing. I was just reading a poem by Gregory Corso, a beat poet, who said, less beat, chalo thukiye, aju vadu thukiye, chalo ne thukiye, the jazz that I'll come back to. Thukiye. But we'll come to that. I'll come to that. Why jazz for a Kalba Devi boy? I'll come to that. I use a word for it, ek kahani Bhuleshwar blues ki. That's the word I use for it. Kalba Devi jam sessions and Bhuleshwar blues sounds so right. Because we grew up on Tukaram Sabam. Please keep that, I wish it's true of all of us. There's something or the other has come to us from oral tradition, which allows us to return to it without giving in anything to quote, unquote, the ideas of Hindu worldview. That's how I look at it. So having said this and having declared my project to friends and myself, standing by the question of formulating the aesthetics of non-resentment, I took the idea of Andrevetto seriously, that you can be a poet without writing a single line of poetry. This is the first sentence in a surrealist manifesto. How else would one cherish it except by a lazy me? What a lovely idea. You can be a poet without writing a single line of poetry. Now, of course, it's not as simple as that. I jump to John Cage now, from this idea of you can be a poet without writing a single line of poetry. And why do I talk of John Cage? I'll talk about him forever. Because there is one, one needs an exemplar once in a while. You get tired by yourself. So you phone a young friend that yaar 24,000 रुपया लेके आना. वो बैंक में है ना तो काम लगता है. You reach out to the world. In 1973, I couldn't come out of the depression and the severe crisis post-masculine. I would go from city to city. I would hitchhike all over US, and I ended up being in Detroit, a rather, somber city. And of course, I went from dukan to dukan asking for a naukri, where assemblage of the motor cars happened, and this little boy from Kalbadevi, would he get a job? They said, "Aap aisa karo, bartan dhone ko jao, McDonald's." So, I would sing Narsi Mehta's bhajan to myself. I would go to Hare Krishna temple and do Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Nothing. And I read John Cage's diaries called Silence. Page by page, line by line. And magic happened. I got it. Why did I get it? What is this John Cage? He's an exemplar of what I mean by non-resentment. At last there is one fellow human being who knows exactly what I'm talking about. He doesn't know. He conducts his life, quote unquote, accordingly. He does it spontaneously, naturally. As his mother would tell him, John, there is one problem with you. You are born with a sunny disposition. Born with a sunny disposition? No. Made sure that the sunny disposition stayed to be around all his life. And when I got that into that mood, I realized what he meant, and this is what he meant. Andrevetto, you can be a poet without writing a single line of poetry. And now John Cage. I have nothing to say, and I am saying it. That is poetry. At last you are free from the confessional mode with which you grew up. with Allen Ginsberg too. Of course, he went to 2 Zen masters because he was quite serious about the idea of enlightenment and satori, and of course 2 drugs ideally. Without it it's not easy. It's too much sadhana, too many months and it retreats. So you do that and go into the trance and you got it, man, sing around. Ginsberg was told by a Zen master, get angry, go out into the world and get angry. Activist. The second Zen master told him, sit quietly at home. The 2 paradoxes with which you conduct your life. You're sitting quietly at home and you're very angry. So comes the point where he says, I have nothing to say and I'm saying it, and that is poetry. That actually gets connected with something even more profound. Where Cage continues to say that we have nothing to lose with poetry anymore because we have nothing to say. And therefore there is neither gain nor loss. We do whatever we want to do with it when we wish to do it. Very similar to what Wittgenstein said. You do philosophy only when you wish to do it. This idea of me wishing to do something and therefore I do it is a starting point of this aesthetics of non-resentment. And therefore, I played with the idea of home. A little more reading and then some poems. What drives one to leave home? To let go the received life world. To cross boundaries. To jaywalk. To give up on metaphors that gave one a name, a community, a form of life, an identity. What is it that makes you give up that? An identity, a name, a way of belonging to a community, and metaphors that permit you to, describe yourself as a, Dasar, Visa, Khadaita, Mania, a family that goes to Sinaji every year, and, there are forms of life which are inherited, and you let it go like that. What is it that drives you to do that? Vinoba left home at the age of 20 to find truth other than what he was born into. A Brahmin, a Pandit with a choti. He leaves it. He never went back. Joyce left Dublin with memories of early childhood to write the universal history of 20th century. That's how he describes Ulysses. Stephen Dedalus is the universal history of mankind, rooted in a small pub in Dublin. He could not find a home in the 22 addresses of Paris. He changed home 22 times in Paris. And he wrote, if I can get to the heart of Dublin, I can get to the hearts of all the cities of the world. Getting to the heart of all the cities of the world. If I could get it there. That's where Vinoba gets his lovely mantra. Act locally, think globally. And you know how Vinoba signed in 1948, he would sign his letters saying, Jai Jagat. Mandelstam, homesickness for world culture. And signing your letters as Jai Jagat. One who leaves a home, finds a fellow traveler in Gandhi, renounces, of course, makes some serious mistakes. That's another story. When he supported Indira, but I'll not go into that. I did not leave the chawls of Kalba Devi, the commercial center of Bombay, till I was 20. The paperbacks from Strand bookstall were good enough for some of the individuals like us to imagine that we were conversing with Godard at Café de Flore and endorsing Breton's pronouncement. The last 2 lines of Breton's Surrealist Manifesto are amazing. Change the world, said Marx. Transform life, said Rambo. And we thought this is a very good idea to be around. I was saying that I announced myself as a poet partly because I couldn't know what to do with this infantile sexuality. And therefore you declare your infatuations to the world. And then you grow up and write some of the most complex, I think, love poems. And in the process of having lived through the idea of love, romantically projecting everything onto it, I think I can leave behind a better expression for love for myself, to Arvind Bhai maybe, that it's a good idea to get rid of the word love completely from one's vocabulary. And for the time being replace it with the idea of the word affection. Because then the notion of karuna makes sense, notion of maitri makes sense, and mudita and upeksha, everything makes sense. Because there is affection, an inbuilt natural flow of wanting to. I mean, that's what Krishnamurti did. When somebody died, he wouldn't have any words to say. He would just go and hold hands. That's it, nothing more to say. So, this idea, I have many, I think it's getting to be 6:30. I'm going to stop talking and read some poems. Is that fine? It connects with most of the things I'm saying. Many more things which, there's one point. Do I have 10 minutes?
Yes.
No, it's the organizers who are saying paisa vasool wale organizers. I'm talking about my friends. Can I speak for 5-10 more minutes? Because this is something about my strategies for composing the poetics of non-resentment. These are my strategies. 3 strategies. I'm not very good at it. Be a good listener. 1. Be a good reader. 2. Now, get rid of the word good. Listen. I mean, old 1962 song when I was holding my cousin's hand, but she wasn't letting me do it, that's okay. But I was singing to her, saying, listen to the rhythm of the falling rain. Remember the song? Maybe some of you. Listen to the rhythm of the falling rain. That's a very simple line. Listening. So what is it to listen? I mean, here I am. I have given lectures on jazz in Xavier's College, at American Society. I might even do it in Harlem, you never know. And I don't know the grammar of jazz at all. 50 years of listening, and I have no clue if I were to talk about the grammar of jazz, but I can infatuate 50 of you if I start talking about jazz. I can do that. I know it for sure. Where does it come from? Listening. Listening to jazz and having the courage to give performing lectures on jazz without knowing the grammar. Now I've got an insight into myself. I have conducted my life without knowing the grammar of it. I wrote a poem in 1971. At the end of series of poems I wrote about my fact of being in US studying philosophy, the 8 or 12 poems came very well. And the last line of the last poem is a 3-line poem. વ્યાકરણ વિનાની સાંજ કેવી આકરી હોય છે. બધા રંગો જોઉં છું પણ કોઈ નામ સૂઝે નહીં. How stiff, hard is an evening without grammar. I see all colors but can't name any. Okay, I got it. I said, Prabodh, you conducted your life without a grammar, but you have been listening, and it's all right. A life without grammar, but with an equal zest for sentences, and paragraphs, and aphorisms, and what not. I wouldn't mind getting away with Chitragut when I'm giving an account of my life, saying, listen, Chitragut, I'm a good listener. Well, most friends wouldn't agree because I talk. Tayyab would say, Prabodh, too much bol beech mein. Don't talk, please. He would get so annoyed so many evenings. Because I'm talking. Here I'm talking. And I'm talking about being a good listener. So what is it to be a reader? Listen to what Kafka says. I have 5 saints in life. One is Saint Kafka from Prague. And there is a reason for calling him a saint, because in Camus' novel called The Plague, there is an argument and a dialogue between Dr. Ryu and the journalist, which goes like this. The challenge in 20th century is to how to be a saint without believing in God. I think that should make us reflect deeply. How to be a saint without believing in God? The whole question of quote-unquote secular worldview emerges from these 2 lines. Without taking away the fact of the sacred from the secular world. Because saintliness has nothing less to do with sacredness than anything else. And in that little sense, I'd say right at the beginning, if I could make sense of Gandhi, I would think about this sentence. How to be. Of course, he knew his Ram well, but that's another story. That cancels my project out, but I meant to let it go, and that's another story. If the book, this is what Kafka says, if the book we are reading does not wake us up with a blow on the head, what are we reading for? We need books to affect us like a disaster. I wrote in the bracket, I hope this is not true of all other acts of living in life, where all relationships and all engagements and all but sabji buying and all conversation leads to a disaster. In the deepest sense of the word, the Jain ontology would say that. In the deepest sense of the word. They would say that engagement with the world in an involved manner with rag and dvesh is a disaster. But let's not go in that direction, because then we get overwhelmed by the religious ideology. Here is Kafka. A book should affect us like a disaster that grieves us deeply, like the death of someone we loved more than ourselves. Like being banished into forest from everyone. Like a suicide. I like that word. I can play with it. Atmanas. Dropping the self. Only then the book comes to you. It's like a suicide of the self that you carry within yourself, with yourself. And then he says, it should act like an axe for the frozen seed inside you. That's what I meant by reading. I don't think so I read with ease. Those years are gone. A book is a torture. A paragraph of Simone Weil makes me feel that I haven't conducted my life meaningfully. It makes me feel deeply incomplete. And I want to stay with it, that incompleteness. So there is an idea in Simone Weil, I'll share that for a moment and then move on, which I'm bringing in with the idea of non-resentment. This idea is tough. She says, unless you have experienced affliction, and affliction is not like suffering, easy to handle. Pain, suffering, dukh, they are handleable, A little here or there, a little evening walk, a glass of beer at a good brewery, seeing your niece coming with a smile. Pain and sufferings are minimized. Affliction is not. It never goes. You are hurt so deeply that nothing can heal it. She says that's the ultimate test of human truth. Can you bear with that and live with it? Then alone you can engage in a conversation with the sacred. And if you're reading that in every book that he writes, every journal, how can you be at ease with yourself and feel that you're composing an aesthetic of non-resentment? So keep affliction as an integral part of your aesthetic. That's the point. I think one person, I'm a little daring and adventurous about this, who does it in a stylistic and slightly impressive manner and likes it is a young filmmaker and artist introduction, Amar Kanwar. I personally think his work, Tayyab's work in a small way, carries the marks of affliction deeply without compromising on. But these are my little observations. You don't have to take them further. So what is it to be a seeker? I talked about being a listener, being a reader. And I told myself, don't give up on being a seeker. I'm a compulsive seeker. And therefore not sought after. That's a way of putting it. I do get invited every week, in a manner of speaking. And Mitra says, stop, giving lectures and going everywhere. But that's not being sought after. Seeking. So what is it to be a seeker? Being awake? Being haunted? Being on the roads? Satsanging on one's own? I have a lot of things that I worked on play, like Bob Dylan in 1964. How does it feel to be without a home, like a complete unknown, like a rolling stone? Now think about this. That's what it means to be a seeker. Can we play that a little? Relax from my babbling, Can we play it? Yeah. Once upon a time, dressed fine, through the bumps of the night in your prime. Didn't you? People call, say you went off, you're proud for, you thought they were all just. Can you? You used to laugh about me. How does it feel? How does it feel? Be without home, like a complete unknown, like a rolling stone. Yeah, so this is what I meant by how does it feel to be without a home, like a complete unknown, like a rolling stone. This is 64, there's Bob Dylan, there's Ginsberg, there are beatniks, and this is the youthful adventures with which you begin. And then, as I said, the poems, it's strange. I don't take myself very seriously as a poet for various reasons, though I am one. Because I have a tremendous clarity about what makes a great poet. And I don't want to take away that understanding by putting myself anywhere near that. No way. That's okay. I think one of the idea of non-resentment is having some of your best friends as the most outstanding geniuses of any language in the world. And don't we know deep inside in those hours we resent that? He's the one, she's the one, and not me. How to live with that feeling? I think I've got it. I know how to live with it. That's where the poetics of non-resentment begins to be operative, without taking away what you have, which is poetry, by the way. Of course, I'm glad that I have a voice of my own. And I wish it doesn't become arrogant voice. But here it is. I'll read some in Gujarati, some in English, and stop here. Stop with a tribute to Tayyab Mehta, who did the cover page for my book. Here is a poem. My poems were translated around 50, 60 of them by Ranjit. Ranjit when he was slightly younger. He still is very friendly. He's big, he's famous. But he's glad he's ready to rework all the translations. And now Shil, who couldn't make it, but they have translated these 55 poems over a period of 10 days, we all three sat together and they were all translated. Well, here is one, Prarthana. Now, as I said, my early poems are handling two things. A chaos for which I have no understanding. I carry a huge chaos within myself. I mean, I ran away from home at the age of 9. Why would I do that? And I went away to Ahmedabad, looking for a home which was much smaller than our Chaul home, and still for me, that was a way of finding another home. And of course, I ran away, quote unquote, to America. And I hitchhiked all over. And I was never at home anywhere here, everywhere. And coming home and idea of this wonderful home, and beware of that which is beautiful. Case says. Now Tagore says something very similar about the idea of beauty. Don't get, dushit. The Baudelaire's idea of flowers of evil. The flowers of evil. Tagore arrives at that kind of aesthetic where there is no resentment to what is most ordinary, trivial, and appears to be dushit. So, having said this, of course I struggle with these issues all the time. So in 72, I ended up writing a poem called Prarthana. Prarthana. I tried my best to do Prarthana. I'm no good at it. Prabodh Parikh, things like that. Forget it. Here is the Prarthana. Mane tari same jovani shakti aap. સૂર્યનું તેજ ઝીલવાની, નગારા પર સુદૂરના વાહનો બોલાવવાની, મરજીવા થવાની, રમકડા ટ્રેન ચલાવવાની, દુકાર ઓરંગવાની, કોઈકના વારમાંથી જાદુઈ જડીબુટ્ટી શોધવાની, મને ફરી એકવાર ભ્રમ આપ. હું સોક્રેટિસ તો છું નહીં. મારા લોહીમાં વહેતા અર્ધ ખુલ્લા ફ્રેન્ચ કવિઓના લેન્ડસ્કેપમાં તરી શકું અને સાંભળી શકું તેવી દ્રષ્ટિ આપ. વારાખડી આપ. વિમાનની શહેરની વૃદ્ધ દાદીમા પાસે બેસવાની મને ફરી એકવાર ભ્રમ આપ. તારા તરફ મારા તરફ ચડવાની સીડીનો. Grant me the strength to look at you, to bear the radiance of the sun, the strength to alert faraway ships on my drumbits, to be a pearl diver, to drive a toy train, to survive a famine, to extract the magic potion from the traces of the infame. Grant me once more an illusion. And though I am no Socrates, grant me the vision to hear, to swim in the currents of the landscapes of French poets which, half open, float away in my blood. Grant me an alphabet of airplane and city which would let me sit by an aging grandmother. Grant me once more an illusion of a ladder to climb to you, to climb to me. This is a prayer I do in 1972. I'll end with my own. As I said, I did write some remarkable, I think, happy love poems, but it was so good just to be in love. It didn't matter to whom and all. All 17, 16-year boys, Napoli, coffee, table, and Anil was a witness to reading all those poems, and sitting, and I would sing Dukhi Man Mere walking by the Nariman Point, and he would listen to it, But then I was in Liverpool as a visiting professor in philosophy for 5 months. And at one point I asked myself, what is this missing somebody? What does it mean? What does it actually mean? And at that time I had not experienced the notion of anityata, what Buddha calls anitya bodh, dukkha bodh and anatma bodh, the three bodhs that we must cultivate in order to understand the true human predicament as I see it. But here are the poems, and I'll end with that. I'll find it. I'll end with a poem that I wanted to have play here of Tagore, a happy poem about having no home. আমি চঞ্চল, আমি সুদূরের পিয়াসী, আমি পথ ভোলা এক পথিক এসেছি. That's one. But the other is the one where you are homeless. And I have a friend in London who says, what is it to be homeless? He works with the homeless in London. He wouldn't agree with anything I say. But about stop being romantic. It's a terrible life. Most of the time I'm rushing out to help them before they commit suicide. So we have to keep all that in mind. But here is a poem that I wrote when I came back in 74 after a long stay in US. And that connects with Ami Potkula. There are three poets, like there is Mandelstam, there is Ginsberg, and I have his poem here, which he is reading in a jazz cafe, a well-known poem, I saw the best minds of my generation how. And here is my poem. જે જાગીને આવ્યો છે, જે જાગીને આવ્યો છે, ઉડીને ડૂબીને કૂદીને વાણના હલેસા ઉલેચીને ફર્યો છે પોતાની પાસે, એના જાગરણનું શું? જે જાગીને આવ્યો છે, ઉડીને ઉડ્યો છે, ડૂબીને ડૂબ્યો છે, મૂઈને મૂવો છે, એના જાગરણનું શું? તે પુપુના અકર્મી દાદાનું, મનુષ્યનું લાકડીને ઠપકારતા ટાયરેશિયસનું શું? જે જીપ્સી ગામના બંદરે લંગારી સમજને ફર્યો છે પોતાની પાસે, ચંદ્રલોકની ચદ્દી પહેરી, કુવાઓ ખોદી નિક્સનનું નાક ચડાવી, દુકાનો છોડી હરખના ગંજી ફરાક પહેરી, ઉડ્યો છે, ડૂબ્યો છે, કૂદ્યો છે, એના જાગરણનું શું? નમઃ જાગરણ, નમઃ શાંતિ, શાંતિ ઓમ શાંતિ, માતેલી રાતેલી પણે ખૂણામાં ફફડતી શાંતિ. ચલો સારું થયું પાછું આવ્યાની ગૃહ શાંતિ, પણ એટલું ધ્યાનમાં રાખજો, જે જાગીને આવ્યો છે, કૂદીને કૂદ્યો છે, મૂઈને મૂવો છે, એના જાગરણનું શું? I think this was in 74 when I came back, and I realized that one had not come back home. Because once you are awake to the self that you are, there is no home. And that's okay. You live with it. You live with it with all the gladness and give yourself to everything. There are some great stories about homelessness of Gandhi, which should move, bring tears in your eyes when he talks about art and not having art on his walls. He's being told that you are a rasika, you have no sense of music, dance, theatre, visual arts, nothing. He said, yeah, but I know. So why are there not paintings on your wall? He said, I just open my doors and windows whenever I want to look at. But that's being, he said, silly. He said, let me tell you something. If it was in my hand, I wouldn't even have walls in my home. Now he said that. હું તો આ ઘરમાં દિવાલોને પણ નથી ઈચ્છતો. Now, this is only a metaphor for a kind of life you're conducting with yourself. We tend to mix up metaphors with a way of life. Of course, it's a metaphor. He had his little Varda Juplis, and he went there once in a while. And there are a small number of other places which could be called. Of course, his ideal home was prisons. Prison is a home. Mandela was another guy who did that. Prison is a home. Prison. The solid walls and the wires. Think of the concentration camp as home. Go one step further. Anyway, here are 4 points which shall positively start. These 4 are, my love poems. I quote a two-line from a very well-known early 20th century Gujarati poet called Pranayani pan trupti thati nathi, Pranayani abhilash jati nathi. Ishq pe jor nahi hai galib, ye banaye na bane, ye mitaye na mitaye. This is the story of that poem. Okay. I'll just read the English translations. This is done by Abhay Sardesai, friend. No satisfaction of the desire to love. No escape from the desire to love. There is this one possibility about your lips. For always they arrive and depart, and they open. As if they were made specially for entering. The other possibility is you, yourself. You begin as an incarnation of an impossible event, moving about as if you were human. I touch you, scold you, and destroy you thorough and thorough, but like a ghost, you take hold of my heart, of my body, every nerve, and every part. Either you are a sorcerer, or else a witch, or you are a friend, or else you are the absent one. This possibility has always led me to blindness, to consume you entirely, and to be destroyed and burnt alive in the fires of my longing, to be pounded, to be blown about, to separate myself from myself, to be sundered. This possibility, you, always. તું અવતરે છે એક શક્યતાની જેમ, કાં તો તું ભૂત છે કે ચુડેલ કે જાદુગર જે હંમેશા મને ભરખી જાય છે. Two, there is this thought that takes me to you. In between, it swallows me up. It devours at first the heart, and then the home, and then the tree and the leaf, and then the land and people, and then the hands and feet. It feasts on. There is this dream about your breast, intimately familiar, and sucked from again and again. They sleep suddenly from the mouth, at first in the morning, and then in the evening, and then all around. They start wilting, they sag. There is this desire that I may hide myself completely in you. Three, whatever is incomplete. Even the sunbeams don't spill till the very end. Even the birds don't wobble till the audiences break into an applause. Whatever it was till now in the heart, in the middle of the breast, in the center of the pupil, in the palm, and in the mouth, sucking on the big toes, even that is destroyed and burnt out, as drowned, has got lost among the thoughts. Whatever was found, whatever I came upon, became a rising wave of the wind, remembering and reverberating in everyone's ears, because the road is going forth. Even this is got scattered, has become water, and has sprayed all over. Last, fourth. Not till there, but till here. Come, penetrate my heart through and through. Pierce and pluck the remaining tresses. Not till here, go all the way, annihilate the earth, obliterate the smell and the form. Not here, not there, but spread yourself everywhere. Come running from everywhere. Come till the very end. Come till the very end. So, here we go once.
We have time for about 4 or 5 questions. No, it's done. Just put it on.
No.
I have a question.
I'll respond to that quickly. No, that's
I
okay.
didn't hear the question.
I have a,
What was the question?
where have I arrived?
Oh, wherever.
I have a very fine Zen poem about that, with a drawing of my own. I have around 140 drawings of mine and color drawings and paintings that I bought, hoping that an art gallery owner would be around. I can flourish and buy a 6-bedroom house, but maybe Anjana can help. No, there is one drawing there that I've done of a wandering monk, where I've used a Zen poem, where it says that today's begging is over. And I have conversed with the children while I was walking around the Asiatic Society. I've just played with the word. Last year, a foolish man. This year, no change. A 4-line poem. Today's begging is over. I have conversed with the children walking around the Asiatic Society. I have come back to my hut. Last year, a foolish monk. This year, no change. So, of course, I haven't arrived anywhere. I'm just shrinking, I'm getting shorter, if that means arriving somewhere. That's just. And my younger brother tells me that's, unless you do those things and all. And I say, Chodna, kya karenge? I try to stand straight, but it doesn't. So I think I'm accepting that. The liftman also accepts it. He doesn't anymore, open the door. It's just, chota hai, jaane do kahta. Yeah, you were saying something.
So, I'm kind of look at this. One of the things that I struggle with when is when you talk about aesthetics of non-resentment, how does one, and we talk about, so much of it talk also about choice, about choosing to find a way to do it, about choosing, feeling yourself up to, I don't have to play it, but there's a lot of choice in what you're talking about, I feel. So how does one reconcile that with the conditions of people in this world who don't have those choices or are living in conditions of oppression? And maybe reconcile is the wrong word. How does one balance a sensibility? How does one not get drawn into oneself alone? Do you get what I'm saying? I'm not sure.
No, I get a sense of it. I often suffer from it. People whom I deeply admire, in the highest sense of the term, truly admire, are the karmashil individuals. Don't get me wrong, activists not. They gave me peace when I come across somebody whose lifetime work is with addressing quote-unquote selflessly to these questions. That's one. But I think I'll entertain you with a parable from Kierkegaard. It's amazing. A philosopher is found very busybody with a jharu and sweeping the streets of Char Bangla ideally, because we need a little sweeping. But he's going around like that, and he's appeared extremely busy. So people, citizens come and ask him, "Hey, what are you so busy with?" He says, "There's war, so everybody is working and busy. So I thought I'll also be of some use, Some of us can stay with being uselessly around, I think. Some of us. It doesn't actually, if you ask me personally, very personally, my ability to deal with fellow citizens is hugely illuminated by some of these self-inquiries. Now, I don't want to sound, Are Prabodh Bhai, aap to bade karunamay hai. No. The sensitivity is not necessary. With some reservations, I would say, the sensitivity to the condition of fellow human beings, which are quote unquote under oppressive various ways, the voiceless of the, the voice of the voiceless kind of thing, is not necessarily functioning in one way. A friend of mine has always helped me to come out of this crisis by saying, but Prabodh, you have been a good teacher for 40 years. But that doesn't satisfy me. I will stay with the fact that I am, because I don't think so I can now shift to anything else. With the fact that I'm a reflective self-inquiry mind. That's it.
But that's not my question.
Oh.
Sorry, but
that's okay.
My question is, when we talk, when we're sharing this, your idea of a politics of non-resentment, I'm just wondering how people who live, and it could be gender, it could be class, it could be anything, right? How people actually live in worlds where pressures are put on you, which constantly invite resentment because of your situation of powerlessness. I'm just wondering about, actually I'm saying it better now.
No, I think you're saying it very well.
But I'm just wondering how one reaches for something.
How does one act effectively in a situation like that?
And I'm saying, how does somebody who actually lives a life like that, which is inviting resentment all the time, reach or make peace with such a politics?
I would give a response, then I will of course reformulate it, but straight away this. One with a non-resentment would function much more effectively in a situation like, much more effectively. Because your ability to take decisions are not guided entirely. They are of course guided by the starting point of the deep deep sense of injustice that is going on. But your ability to act on it effectively and very effectively with a long-term effectiveness comes when, in one way or the other, that individual has somehow, either through traditions in which you are born or through the training that you go through, developed a skill of functioning. I think, you may disagree, but is so, and I can go one step further now, back to my favorite. Gandhi does that very well. He is working with, of course, individuals who are full of resentments all around him, including his own resentments that he constantly works on. Doesn't successfully, he's a tragic figure for me. He is not, he's a failed life, but a most significant failed life. Because he is formulating poetics of non-resentment, constantly, continuously, stubbornly, and sometimes authoritatively. And therefore there are a lot of disturbing, we feel very disturbed. Okay. Yeah, Prasad.
Can you be at home in the world if others are not at home in the world?
Only if you are at home in the world, you will look usefully to those who are not at home in the world. Otherwise, all of us are hugely, most of the time preoccupied. Some of us have the belief that one may own one's own home. I take this very seriously. Of course, we work on it all the time. But I think we are not. We may use words, we have made strategies, we may be effective academicians, but to be actually useful to those who don't have home, one does minimize one's idea of one's own home. One does. I think it was looking at my reflections on idea of, look at Gandhi's homes. It's a very good metaphor. Look at all his homes after he moves out to South Africa. He creates ashrams. He creates sanctuaries. And of course, most of the people there, I think we could be a little more useful with those who have no home. There's a lovely poem by Muhammad Darwish, the poet, Palestinian poet, and I know that poem by heart. He says, think of others, the title of the poem. And he goes step by step like this. And then it comes to the idea of home. At night when you go back home to your favorite sleep, think of those who have no homes to go back to. Okay. Now, Godard uses this very well in his film called History of Music Film, where he's conversing with him. And he talks about this poem and he recites this. So, of course, you are touched by that. But it still doesn't take away the idea that one with a sense of home, being home everywhere, is not able to give attention to those without home. I think there is a greater attention possible. But we are exceptionally limited human beings. Exceptionally. Those who appear to be doing big things are equally limited, and those who don't seem to be doing much are very limited. So I'm ready to learn, meaning admire those individuals who make some difference. That's the best I can do. The other day there were 30 Gujarati scholars, writers, scientists, architects who gave lectures for 1 year every Sunday morning of the month on, if this was my last lecture series taken up on, it was called Amaru Jo Antim Pravachan Hoy To. And everybody spoke well, Narayan Desai to whatnot, Murari Mapu, everyone, big audiences. One person who moved me to tears was a man, an Dalit activist called Martin McWan. I mean, his life spoke, his words didn't speak. And his sense of home, I was talking to him, is what home? The entire community is home. So they are my, individuals whom I admire most. ठीक है. Okay. Thank you for being here. Any more questions? No?
You must be finding it very challenging to do it.
That's another story. She finds it difficult with me. Give me another evening. No. She's almost never at home, which is such a good thing. She retires next year. She's going to be 60 in another 9 months. So she leaves home at 8, comes back at 8 in the evening. 12 hours, I am by myself. Shutting windows, opening windows, moving out and coming in, and doing all kind of things. And No. Let's not get into this exceptionally. No. In the most, again, I think another wonderful thing about Sartre in his last writings, a small book called Words, which is his autobiography, very, very sensitive confessional book. Of course, he's an intellectual, so he can't come with lyrical lucidity he doesn't have. But even then he writes that life must be an open book. One book that was completely open was that of Gandhi. Okay? Gandhi. One of the hundreds of examples. My description of good life would consist with family, which appears to be one of the most intimate concerns of ours, to let it go. To let it go. What we consider to be the most intimate concerns is where our sense of the limits of the self are most operative. They're so operative. We don't have the courage to look into the eyes of those issues. There is a book by an American feminist which just has got me. So it's by a woman called Suzanne Griffin, and she writes about denial. Most families are living, no generalization. Some families live with acts of denial. We live with it throughout our life. Father, mother, we can't look into their eyes. I will never be able to speak about my mother without hundreds of contradictions, pains, unhappinesses, and of course, some wonderful memories. Let it be. Let it go. But this is my personal journey. I haven't come to terms with it. But I find everyone around me deeply engaged with families. It's okay. I'm glad I'm a part of their families. That's another story. That's wonderful. Our friend Haridas, who passed away, Haridas Patel, what a guy. He said he didn't marry. He said 365 friends would make life bearable because you will meet that friend only after a year. Now, why did he say that? Well, he said it in order to say, हर शाम को किसी के घर खाने जा सकता हूँ. He'll never say कि वापस आ गया. Because I'll see him after a year for the dinner, of course. नहीं, Haridas said that so well. Sunil is like that, not married. And he invites himself to everyone's home. Does it so well. Such a good life. Anyway. No, I go back home. And it was only in those days that Kalbadevi rooms were too small. One wanted to go home only at 2 in the morning. 4 brothers, 2. And one was always looking for a bathroom somewhere. And those are funny stories. But none of this makes you renounce home. It only allows you to place it at the right place. And that in turn allows you to be very generous. Of course, Mitra scolds me all the time कि तू साला हर एक के घर में रह के आया है. तेरे घर में जब लोग रहने आते हैं तो मुंह बनाता है. That is some truth in that. चलो, thanks. Thank you very much.